Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Continuing on. So these are good thoughts and good reflections. Like that says to me that you're not just listening to what I'm saying and going, oh, very well said, Bhante, well said, Bhante. And then as soon as the sitting is done, you get up and you go and do your thing, and it's just done. You're actually asking the questions. You're actually looking at your environment, and you're considering, how do I use my senses? How do I relate to the things around me? And by extension, what mind states am I developing through my associations with these sense objects? We don't usually think that way, because for the most part, we think that when we just let our mind go, that's when we're not cultivating stuff, right? Like when I'm trying to have metta, that's when I'm cultivating metta. But we think, okay, when I stop doing that, I'm no longer cultivating my mind. But that's not the case. It's in those moments, it's 50-50. You may not be cultivating anything, but your mind might, through habit, be cultivating ill will. You might be off just completely recycling a narrative about how so-and-so is the worst person in the world, a complete narcissist and out to get you in every way possible. You're cultivating, you're developing. And so there's no such thing as just letting the mind go. When we do that, if we're in the presence of things that develop stories, that develop associations, then our mind will cultivate something. If we've got a bunch of wholesome stuff gathered around us, then those associations might be pleasant. If we're reminders of good people or benefactors, reminders of friends and Dhamma teachers, well, then even when our mind is just kind of like doing its own thing, it's going to land on those objects and it's going to bring up a wholesome idea. And the net result will be a little bit positive. We let our mind go, but it only created wholesome mind states. So it's not going to drag us down into realms of suffering. It's just we have relinquished our control a little bit. But now the best state that we can aim for is that we can let our mind just be, and it doesn't get drawn to anything at all, whether pleasant or unpleasant. And that does involve, like we were exploring earlier, a sense of reacclimating to neutrality, an appreciation of those things that don't make us feel one way or the other. Why is that? As I said, we can't switch our senses off. Just as was being said, we are moving in a direction where we don't need the senses. We are moving in a direction where the senses can be let go of. But how to get there? Well, it's actually through purifying our relationship to the senses. So in order to let go of the senses, we have to be at complete peace with them. We can't let go of the senses while we're actively fighting them for dominance. Like, you want to watch that, but I want you to be calm. That conflict actually holds the senses in place, holds them at the forefront of our mind. And it's not until that ceases that we even have the option of just not paying attention to our senses, of transcending the five senses and getting into the mental realm, where we can look at the thoughts and impressions and feelings and perceptions that are coming up, and really understand the underpinnings and the guts of the way our mind works. Before that, like I said, basic state of a human being, we're thinking about sense stuff. We're thinking about stuff in the world around us. And that sights and sounds, we have voices, things other people said, feelings in our body, flavors, and thinking about food we want to make, all sorts of things. Yeah. And that's our mind's language for creating worlds, for creating stories. It uses sense objects. Yeah. So it's very appropriate. We've got to come to know these, come to understand these. The best place to do that is in a place where we're not being stimulated. Yeah. So it seemed, and again, we know this, right? This is not new. And everybody who has had to step away from a computer because their eyes feel fuzzy and their brain is a mess, knows what it feels like. That's what it feels like to have not been guarding the senses. You feel worn down, you feel a little tired, you feel fuzzy. And probably if you've ever stepped away, you have also maybe a little bit experienced the recovery. So when you do step away, you do get away from that thing that's been grabbing your attention. Maybe you go on a walk, or you go to another room, or you lay down and look at the ceiling. You know that experience of the mind gradually unentangling itself, kind of loosening up. This is one of the most fundamental and important human skills, the ability to relax. And it's being lost. It's being lost at a remarkable rate because people can stay distracted for so long, yeah, that they forget what it's like to be in a space that is not stimulating them. And they lose the appreciation of that. It's the appreciation that allows you to step up in a space where nothing's going on. And unfortunately, that's the only place where your senses are going to start to relax. It has to be a place where you're not being stimulated. You can't put yourself even in a pleasantly stimulating environment and expect your senses to relax. They have to be somewhere where everything is kind of neutral, or at least everything is not self, is just allowed to be the environment, is allowed to be just sense data. And that's what we're looking at. That's what we're working with. So as a goal, that's what I want to address a bit more in the second half today, is kind of demystifying that as a goal. Because I think also, if you're here and you even signed up for something called a daylong, you're trying. And you're setting aside extra time and you're putting extra parameters on your day, which means you would like to have more sense restraint and more peace than you normally do. You would like to give more time to meditation than you normally do. And now here's another experience I bet you've all had, is that when you get done, you're going to crash. Yeah? It's like a rubber band that's been pulled long, you're going to snap back. And you're going to grab a pint of ice cream, or you're going to turn on the TV and you're going to just blow through, Facebook. Something's going to happen where you're just going to be like, okay, that was exhausting. That was too tense. I need to relax. And you're maybe going to relax by going and doing all the things that you've been restraining over the course of the day. And that is also very normal. So to give a sense of how this works, it's not a light switch. Yeah, this is not something that you will just instantly get. This is the Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is describing a lifestyle. So sense restraint is not something you just get and then you move on. It's a faculty and appreciation that you're going to be developing over time, even as you start to move on into the territory of mindfulness and contentment and samadhi, working with the hindrances and overcoming them. Still, when you get up off the cushion, there's going to be some work to do in terms of sense restraint. And even somebody who can, get to the fourth jhana probably has, sensual thoughts come up later on when they're out doing their stuff. And I know it's a funny thing that at the monasteries I've been at, the people who are the best at meditation are the most likely to leave the monastery. Yeah, and it's kind of curious, but we can't assume that good meditation is going to make us completely immune to distraction and obsession. It might be quite the opposite, because we can spend time free from the hindrances. We might lull ourselves into thinking that we're safe. And then lo and behold, we leave our senses unguarded for a little while, and we get lost. We go off and we do something, and it's fun and it's great. And because we've been cultivating wholesome mind states, we enjoy it so much more than we did before. But that's the reality. Sense restraint is going to take time to develop. And if we set up the idea, the mystique, that we are moving towards a state where everything is neutral, everything is peaceful, it might be less attainable for us, right? So if we imagine that having sense restraint is just, we're just gonna sit around, we're gonna listen to the crickets, you know, we might read a book or we might not. We're gonna be blissful and happy and simple. And we're never going to have thoughts about TV shows or other people or going places. No, we're beyond that. No, we're going to be intrinsically happy and at peace wherever we are. Now, is there anybody who's kind of entertained that idea from time to time? Yeah, exactly. It's very normal, like, because we're asking ourselves to conceive of something we just do not do. And that's to be happy in and of ourselves. And if we were already good at it and we had already perfected it, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't be in the sensual realm. We wouldn't have been born here, because birth does not happen by accident. Yeah, there's causes, there's conditions. So we didn't just accidentally get born in the human realm with 5 senses. We kind of walked into it. Now, why? You know, that's what we're exploring. When we do come to understand the senses, then there'll no longer be that pull, and there'll no longer be the causes and conditions for distraction and obsession. So instead of conceiving the perfection of sense restraint as being in the state of being exceedingly boring and okay with it, just kind of like being able to sit around and not need anything, and not even notice that you don't have anything interesting, because that's not very attainable. But starting to shift our narrative, that sense restraint is really more about what we see somebody like the once returner in terms of an enlightened being. And the once returner is somebody who's abandoned lust and hatred. So sense restraint is operating in a lot of these in much the same dynamic. It's not that we're losing all sense of appreciation for what's going on around us. You know, even the Arahant knows when something is nourishing and knows when something tastes good. You know, even a fully enlightened being likes certain things and doesn't like other things. They just don't suffer when they don't get the things they like and get the things they don't like. They just don't suffer about it, but they still have like things that are nice to them and things that they would rather not deal with. Yeah, but for the once returner and for the development of sense restraint, it's more about if you left your mind unguarded, it might go to these places that are very damaging, where we it's not just that we've lost control in the way that we lose control when we get distracted or we daydream for a minute. It's that we lose control in a kind of runaway train kind of way. And lust is a kind of feedback loop where the mind keeps telling itself that something is more beautiful than it actually is. And it becomes obsessive. Yeah. And again, people probably know what it's like to have a crush on somebody. And the mind is just caught up like, oh, they're so great. They're so great. And you're like, well, they're not that great. And you're like, yes, they are. Yes, they are. And it's like obsessive, and it loops on itself. And it feels awful. Often we tell ourselves that it feels great. but it's out of control, and that's what's awful about it. And the same thing is happening in reverse with hatred. We tell ourselves that so and so is so awful, so awful, and you're like, well, they're not that bad. Yes, they are. They did that intentionally. I can't believe they did that. They knew that would bother me. And so these are mind states, and we begin to discover through this practice that there's a point of choice, that lust and hatred can only happen if we leave our senses unguarded. If we leave our mind open to those states. So we're starting to look at our mind and realizing something that's even bigger than the preceding form of enlightenment. So the entryway into the sure path to full enlightenment is called stream entry, and it involves somebody seeing that all things are impermanent, that nothing lasts forever, that things are arising and ceasing, that they're shifting, that there is no core me, that I am different in different situations with different conditions. And that's okay. They become okay with it. They're like, yeah, actually that simplifies things a lot. It takes a load off my mind. It means I'm not an angry person. There's just anger right now. It means there can be a state without anger. It means I'm not a greedy person. So I'm feeling greed right now, but there can be a state without greed. Yeah. But then taking that further, we begin to see that even the core mental states that we have come to know, we can choose, because they are not us. They are not us at our core level. That they don't need to be there. And lust and hatred are things that are entirely optional and deal with how we apply our mind to things. Yeah. So this is at the most essential level what sense restraint will begin to give us. And so if we imagine that we're going to move into a state where we just wear sweaters and read books, we don't have a TV, we don't go to movies, we're not in any relationship, we're just really like white rice, bland, and somehow happy with that. It will be a bit more difficult to associate than to imagine we may feel, we'll move through life and we may feel called to get angry about something. But even when we're upset, we'll still have that mindfulness that says, I'm not going to give myself over to this anger. Still I'm going to have boundaries. I'm angry, but I'm never going to give in to hatred. And likewise, I like this, but I'm never going to fall into that feedback loop of lust. Like, I gotta have this. This is the best thing ever. I'm going to obsess about it. Right? We're starting to imagine that cage, or the chicken coop, yeah, as a protective layer rather than a prison. We're starting to see that if we can keep the mind within a certain range, we'll have a level of peace that we've never been able to experience before. And it's a different kind of peace. It's the peace of consistently being, I want to say in control, but again, that can be a little deceiving. It's more like that we don't need to control it. So because the conditions for it to go out of control have been curtailed. Yeah. We've attended to the things that make us get, feel hate or to feel lust. We've dealt with those. We know what those are, and we just do not go there. So now if we can imagine for a moment moving through life, and whenever something that makes us really angry is there, we feel that kind of tension, right? Of restraint. We're like, yeah, I really hate that guy, but I'm not going to give myself to think that this is the worst person ever and I should kill him. And, I never want to see that person again. I'm going to deal with it because I know this anger is mine and I can work through it. Yeah. And so sometimes you're just good without the anger. And sometimes you're angry, but you're not hating. Now imagine moving through life and you get attracted to people, you get in relationships, you love people and you think that they're great. But you're never going to become a stalker. You're never going to obsess over somebody. You're never going to just sit there and think how being with that person will make your life perfect and happy. You're always going to have this mindfulness and this kind of tension that says, yeah, but it's impermanent. It'll end at some point. So it can be good, but I'm not going to fully invest in it. I'm gonna hold on to the mindfulness I got, and we'll see how good it is without giving way to lust. Now that's a bit more attainable, yeah? Just imagining that sometimes you'll apply yourself to being careful, but most of the time you won't have to. And because most of the time you won't have to, you will get more comfortable with not being filled with lust and hatred. And this is what is a more accurate impression of what sense restraint provides for the mind. Sometimes it involves exerting some energy around things that are dangerous or susceptible to unwholesome, unskillful states. But the majority of the time, it'll be like the pole or the refrigerator or the incense. There'll just be a background mindfulness that says everything here is good. Everything here is like normal. There's nothing to worry about. And your guard can be down, yeah? And you can just apply your mind in whatever way you like. So that's, and I don't know if you can see, but that's what leads to samadhi, because that's a lot of energy that's been saved. At first, there's going to have to be some training, like you're going to have to make some objective decisions, yeah, about what things you be guarded about and what things are harmless. And creating some environments that are mostly harmless so you can go to for the process of relaxation. Because again, you can't make yourself relax, and it's very hard to relax in a stimulating environment. So to create some environments where relaxation is just going to happen, yeah, if you let yourself. There's one last aspect of this that's worth mentioning, and that's the aspect of beauty. So something that happens when the mind begins to become concentrated and desire and aversion are not in proximity is that it becomes pleasant. And as I said, you'll start by recognizing those things in your environment which are neutral. But like I said, there's this pole, right here. You can't see it, but it's in the middle of the room, and I've got the computer actually up against it. And it's neutral and it's bland. It's just covered with a carpet, but the carpet is kind of fraying in places. And I was looking at it earlier, and it's amazing how beautiful it looked. And it's the funny thing that philosophers have questioned, what is beauty for millennia? And there's one important aspect of it that can sometimes be overlooked, and is that beauty is not necessarily in the object. What we call beauty is an experience rather than a characteristic of something. So there could be beauty in the object. And this is when we identify things that might be very attractive to us and susceptible to desire. We could say, okay, that's a beautiful, high quality, interesting object. But there can also be beauty in the observer. And when there's beauty in the observer, then it doesn't matter what the object is. You still end up having a beautiful experience in regarding it. So as we begin to decouple our mind from the need to get beauty from objects, or be repulsed by other objects, as we get back out of this state of being bounced around and stimulated, we're stepping back into a state where it's all on the observer, it's all on our minds to provide those experiences, which means it's not dependent on the senses. So we can start looking at our mind itself. Yeah. And this means because it's not dependent on the senses, it's not blameworthy in any way. It's pure. It's like nobody can blame you for being happy sitting in a room. If somebody tries, you just tell them whatever. Tell them the monk said it's okay to be happy for no reason at all. It's totally all right. It's even commendable. Good for you. Yeah. And that's what we want, right? It's kind of why we signed up. It would be really nice to be able to be happy without having to have something making us happy. Yeah? And this is what happens in a curious way. And you can't make it happen. It's like relaxation. Yeah, it's a natural process. So as energy leaves from the parts of the mind that are about distraction, it's going to return to the mind itself, which means there'll be more presence, there'll be more attention available for whatever object is in front of us. And then the experience gets more beautiful. So there's a lot of ways this can play out. I've mentioned before the Japanese word wabi-sabi, which means the beauty of something in a state of decay. And they've actually made it a product in Japan. They'll use a blowtorch to kind of char and mark wood, and the wood becomes more expensive when they do it. Stores will sometimes cut patterns in the knees of the jeans, so it looks like the jeans have been worn for a long time, and they'll sell them. They'll sell them for $60-$70. Yeah, because they look like they've been worn in. Because who has the time to wear in their own jeans and to the point that the knees fall apart? You can just buy them that way. So there is a certain beauty that begins to emerge from just about anything when we have the ability and the faculty available to us to appreciate it. And we look for stability in the world. It's jarring when we try to establish our mindfulness and things are always changing. But there's a weird kind of stability that will arise for us when we begin to practice sense restraint and we're just surrounded by neutral stuff. The neutral stuff is kind of consistent. And because it's consistent, our mind kind of relaxes. And when our mind relaxes, our mind feels stable. It's a paradox in a way. We become comfortable with this impermanent, meaningless noise, like the hum of an appliance or the chirping of crickets, or just this meaningless white wall. Yeah, and we get used to that. And because we get used to that and comfortable with it, our mind is what becomes stable. And again, it's not the object that is stable, and yet we feel a sense of stability because our mind is no longer moving in association with that object. Our mind has become stability, our mind has become beautiful. And so it is a beautiful, stable experience. So we could spend our entire life seeking for stability of mind. And we can sit here and we can sit there, we can go to this retreat and we can listen to that teacher and we can eat this food and have that diet and eat that food and have this diet and never find stability. Whereas if we begin to practice with this and give ourselves these opportunities to kind of disconnect from stimulation and set these boundaries to protect that state, to nurture that state, then we will progressively find ourselves in a place where the most stable thing is our senses that are always changing. Yeah, because our mind will now be completely comfortable and it won't need to have the guard up. Yeah, when we get really good at this, we don't have to say, I won't get distracted by that. There is no longer any interest in getting distracted by that. Yeah. This is the state that meditators begin to find and move into. Whether or not they've gotten good at meditation, is over time, the path matures around sense restraint such that the meditator's mind never really leaves the immediate vicinity of their body. And it's because it doesn't want to. It's because it knows where peace and stability is. It's not out there. It's not in the things. It's through the experience of calm. It's through the experience of appreciation. So I can say that you might find something through this practice, but the reality is you will probably find the absence of things to be the most appealing part of sense restraint. You'll probably find the absence of states of delusion and anxiety to be the most palpable thing you get, which is why don't beat yourself up if you forget and you go back to watching a TV program, or you go back to listening to music, or you go back to anything that is your kind of go-to indulgence. You don't beat yourself up, because it's very easy to overlook that kind of peace. It's very easy to overlook the absence of suffering, but you want to just keep coming back to it, like we are today. If you give yourself these days where you kind of switch off the need and you turn on sense restraint, you say, okay, I'm going to establish a couple of rules for the day, you will get better at it. You will develop a taste for the peace of mind that is not dependent on objects. And as that taste begins to grow, the pleasure that you get from being calm will begin to exceed the pleasure you get from interesting objects. And when that happens, it's very natural. You won't become a white rice eating, sweater wearing, book reading nobody. Yeah, you will actually really enjoy the things that you do, but you will do them at a completely different pace. Yeah, you won't have to do them. You'll just appreciate them as they come, and then appreciate them as they go, and then you will be available for the next thing that comes. Yeah, that's what we're working towards. So some thoughts to work with. Yeah. Now, why don't we round out the half hour sitting? The schedule says this will be a guided meditation. But I'm quite thankful for everybody providing their perspectives, because first thing after the meal, middle of the afternoon, it's hot, there was some doubt that my mind would be able to produce anything to talk about. And likewise, you may find that it's not even a matter of sense restraint. Your mind's just at this time of day just doesn't want to be doing much. But again, the state of just letting it flap around, just letting your mind do whatever it wants, is not the most productive state, and could be actually the cultivation of states that move in the wrong direction. So instead, we can maybe think of what is our proximity to lust and hatred. Now, this is going to be very personal, yeah? And it's going to deal with what's going on in your life right now. So there may be some of you that you can recognize they're close. Either you have a very difficult situation that's nearby that keeps coming up, or maybe a very attractive situation that keeps coming up. or has come up recently and has reminded you that you still need to be on guard, that peace of mind is not an accident. It is the domain of those who apply themselves. But if there's no immediate danger of either lust or hatred, can you also feel that? Can you recognize the absence of that state? And if it so happens that at this moment there's nothing or nobody you feel particularly angry or resentful towards, then it's okay. You don't need to find somebody. What is the absence of anger like? And in what way can the mind relax in the absence of things that make you angry? Imagine a state where there's no danger of getting angry, where anger won't arise. And it's okay if you need to imagine yourself picked up and placed on some tropical island or mountain lodge or Buddhist temple, to try to picture yourself not being angry at something, but yet just try to imagine yourself in that state, what it would be like to not be triggered, not be able to be triggered. What is your proximity to the state of lust, to the state of obsession? Is there anything you found recently that you just couldn't let go of? You couldn't leave alone, just kept coming back to again and again? It could be a person, or it could be an addiction. There was a compulsion. If that's the case, and there's something quite recent, then imagine what ways right now you're protected from that. Maybe even just by distance, or by the inability to get to that thing. Or at the very least, you've made a decision to leave that thing alone right now. If nothing seems really relevant, nothing seems really close in terms of lust and obsession, then feel what that feels like. What is the absence of lust, the absence of craving for something? What does that feel like? It's not a not state, because the mind can relax in the absence of things that cause it to be distracted and feel craving. So what does that relaxation feel like? What does it feel like to be safe from craving? And again, if you need to put yourself in some place or in some time, surrounded by some situation, to even be able to imagine that, then that's okay. Just put yourself there. Now ask yourself, what is it like now to be free of lust? What is it like to be able to choose, to have control, to be able to appreciate what you have in the moment rather than desiring something you don't have? Imagine what you would be like if you gave up lust and hatred, if you decided finally to put boundaries down, that you would just never go into those mind states again. Think about what you'd be giving up, but now ask yourself, what would you still have? What could you still do? Who could you still be around? Where could you still live? In what ways might your life change? What would it be like to always be aware and in control of your senses? It's okay if it seems a little weird. It seems like somebody that you don't think you could be right now. It's just a hypothetical situation. Yeah, you might still be able to form an idea that might not be that absurd, might not be that out of reach of yourself as calm and restrained in the faculties. That's an image you might actually want to hold on to and explore a little bit. Again, this is a training. So it may be a hypothetical mental image of yourself in control of your senses and not indulging, not losing yourself, not giving way to anger, being very careful. It may seem far off. You may know that it's unsustainable at the moment. And yet it can be interesting, especially in this moment when you've set aside a little bit of time to just feel into what that would be like. Learn about it. Imagine it. Suspect that there's maybe some part of that you could actually get for yourself. Yeah? So now, for the next 2.5 hours, you can sit and walk as you feel called. This feels appropriate. And we'll leave the room open. Please enjoy. And when you come back, you can see how everybody's practicing too. Personally, I'm going to be coming and going on the half hour, but because we're not all in the same room, you do what you see fit. Yeah.